I call the honourable member Eugenie Sage. Tēnā
koe, Mr Speaker, thank you. The Green Party continues to oppose the Local Government Act 2002 Amendment Bill, and the passing of this bill will be a very sad day for local government and democracy in New Zealand. And that's partly because of what it says and what it symbolises about the relationship between central and local government. As I said at the second reading of the bill, National does not understand, it does not respect and it does not trust local government and the communities that councils and community and local boards represent. And given the breadth of services and responsibilities that local government provides, its role in environmental management of our lands, our coasts, our air and water, and its massive contribution to shaping the places that we live in, work and play in, it's deeply disappointing that the government does not understand local government and has put such an attack on it through this bill. Because, Mr Speaker, it's local government decisions about what sort of services should be provided that are often the most direct and concrete expression of democracy. And it's very disturbing the changes that this bill makes to that and to the relationship between central and local government. Because, Mr Speaker, in New Zealand we have a fragile democracy. We may have a proud history of suffrage, and our country being the first where women gained the right to vote. We don't have a written constitution, we don't have a second chamber, we don't have a Supreme Court that can overturn legislation. The fact that Parliament is sovereign means that at the moment where we have a strong and independent local government arm, that represents a check and a balance, and this bill, in undermining the independence of local government by increasing the powers of ministerial interference and intervention, compromise that independence and compromise the check and balance that local government provides. It puts councils under the thumb of Wellington. It will have them looking through the benchmarks to how they're performing in relation to the minister's opinion, rather than directing their relationship primarily to the communities that they represent and that elect them. And as the Auckland District Law Society said in its submission, and I quote, "The proposals for intervention are not only unnecessary, they are constitutionally untenable and strike at the heart of the notion of a separate institution of local government." Local government should be accountable primarily to its community through the consultation it does, through the representation function and through the election and the power of the ballot box every 3 years. And it's elected councils which work closely with their communities that are best placed to decide the services and the range and scope of those services that they should deliver, not central government. And, Mr Speaker, it was the Local Government Act 2002 which recognised that by putting at its core the purpose of enabling democratic local decision-making by and on behalf of communities and promoting the community's social, economic, environmental and cultural well-being. National is taking an axe to both elements of this purpose and to the operation of local government through this bill. It's doing that through the deletion of the four well-beings and the new purpose, which requires councils to meet the needs for good quality infrastructure, which is defined through cost effectiveness, as if dollars were always the fundamental assessment of value. And where you define it through cost effectiveness, of course cost effectiveness is important, but it shouldn't be the sole criteria by which local councils make their decisions about what sort of services they provide, because, Mr Speaker, that risks the decision being focused on what is cheapest, it risks challenges to those decisions, and it risks an underinvestment in infrastructure and infrastructure maintenance. So, Mr Speaker, the change that this bill represents to local government is potentially the most significant change in the sector since the major reorganisation in 1989. And, Mr Speaker, the other major change are these powers of ministerial intervention in relation to significant problems as defined by the Minister. and the ability for the Minister to appoint a Crown Observer, a Crown Review Team, a Crown Manager, or of course Commissioners. So, Mr Speaker, it should be the local councils deciding where they need assistance and getting it from independent agencies, not the Minister intervening. And we know that the government's included this part of the bill because it wants to spare itself the embarrassment of bringing legislation like the Environment Canterbury Bill that we've got before Select Committee at the moment and the 2010 Bill to interfere with the council and replace elected councillors with its self-appointed commissioners so it can ensure it gets the right decisions at the regional and local level. And, Mr Speaker, it is very rich for Minister Williamson to talk about listening, because the Select Committee had over 500 submissions. They overwhelmingly opposed the change to the purpose of local government, and it's enormously corrosive of people's faith in the democratic process and in this Parliament when those submissions were given so little weight. And, Mr Speaker, the other major thrust of the bill, which we've heard from the Honourable Dr Nick Smith, about rates rises and debt rises, and the need for the benchmarks to improve financial management. By international standards, there is a very high level of financial management in terms of the rigour and transparency of that in local government. We have draft annual plans being put out for public consultation, draft 3-year plans, councils having to do an annual report, a financial strategy having to be prepared in terms of changes and increases in rates. All of those measures and the fact that they are reviewed by the Office of the Auditor-General promote transparency and rigour. We don't have a draft budget being put by central government out to consultation by the people. The focus on rates, Mr Speaker, is partly because these rates are paid out of people's net after-tax income. It's not like the PAYE tax, which is paid before people receive it. That's why there's so much focus on rates in the community, because they come out of the net income. And, Mr Speaker, this whole proposal of establishing benchmarks, fortunately, by an SOP, there's been a change so that the benchmarks are no longer tied to the intervention powers, but the Auckland Council was very clear that the benchmarks and the soft cap that they will potentially impose on rates won't improve the council's financial management. Potentially, they make it much more difficult, because they will degrade rather than enhance the council's ability to manage their affairs in a financially and fiscally prudent manner, because they potentially lead to a change in the credit rating. The security against which councils borrow is their ability to raise rates to meet their debt obligations. If you have soft caps, that reduces the value of that security. It potentially leads to a change in the credit rating and an increase in the cost of borrowing. And as we keep saying to the government, borrowing spreads the costs of new infrastructure across several generations. Councils' costs wouldn't be rising if they weren't investing in infrastructure, which helps provide the basis of the economy. It makes sense to invest in infrastructure. And Mr Speaker, the other reason this bill is wrong is that it's completely out of step with what is happening internationally. There in the United Kingdom, with the Localism Act, you are getting and building a capacity in local government to facilitate the building of stronger communities. You're getting stronger community governance. You're getting more commitment to participation by the community in everyday decision making. This bill runs completely counter to international trends. This bill is about the centralisation of government. It's about having councils which are more distant from their communities, and it's about trampling on local democracy through the reorganisation provisions. And in conclusion, Mr Speaker, that proposal in the bill for the changes to Schedule 3 are eroding the democratic rights of citizens to decide how they will be governed. It will shift the onus from local government consulting with its citizens about how whether a reorganisation should occur, to putting the burden on citizens to seek this petition to get a poll. So it's much more onerous, and it puts a great deal of power in the hands of the Commission rather than leaving the major decision-making in the community's hands. That's why we oppose the bill, Mr Speaker.
Jackie Dean.
The Local Government Act 2002 Amendment Bill provides